All right, thank you for tuning in. This is the new SEC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. We got Hunter Zeisman here. This is our recap Monday episode. The dust is settled. The SEC championship game was played. All the other conference championship games have been played, and we have a final bracket. This episode, we're going to talk about just at a high level what happened in the conference championship game with the SEC and Georgia taking down Texas. We'll talk about the other conference championship games as well. And then what does that mean for the final bracket? We'll give you an early first look at the first four matchups and what we think in some of these really interesting games. The battle for Indiana, Clemson taking on Texas, a rematch of two high school quarterbacks in the state championship with Kate Klubnik and Quinn Ewers, Ohio State and Tennessee traveling up there. We'll talk about that game. And of course, we'll talk about Penn State and playing SMU, SMU's first berth into a playoff, and for Penn State, first berth into a playoff as well. So thoughts from conference championship weekend as we get this conversation going.
A lot of thoughts about the games themselves. They were all really good games. I mean, even the ones that were pullaways, Arizona State, got to see something from them that now that they're in the conference or in the college football playoff as a team with a bye, there's someone to actually be looking at as someone who can take down anyone. They have the crazy rushing game behind Cam Scadaboo. So that's just my initial thoughts. But also on the other side and looking at the first four games, initial thoughts, this is the first year where weather will be mattering in the playoffs. And that's something that's really exciting. I love the snow games in the NFL. Now we might get to see some of those in college football, and that's cool.
Yeah, we will potentially get to see some of these snow games, like you mentioned, in the playoffs. We saw a couple during rivalry weekend for some of the teams up in the Midwest and then Missouri, who's the only Midwest team in the SEC. From conference championship weekend, starting from that Friday, Boise State delivered a really impressive win over UNLV. Second time they beat UNLV. We saw the committee kept UNLV ranked, so that probably helped propel Boise State to get one of those top four first round buys for them, but they won 21-7, conference champions. One last game for Ashton Jeanty to make his Heisman push before the award show this week.
Yeah. And how are you feeling? I mean, I know we're kind of torn here on two guys that have the potential to win it. I think there's a strong fan base that thinks that Ashton Jeanty has it. A strong fan base that thinks that Travis Hunter has it. Does him winning and putting his team in the playoff mean anything for you in Ashton Jeanty's campaign?
I think it absolutely means a lot for the Ashton Jeanty campaign. I think it ultimately shows, the Heisman is going to be for the player that's the most impactful player in the country that plays a role in his team getting to a championship and winning a championship. We saw last year with Jaden Daniels, a champion was not the winner of the Heisman Trophy. And so for Ashton Jeanty, it goes a long way for his campaign. I'm still team Travis Hunter here. I think he's top 5 at both positions. Thought he was a Thorpe finalist snub, but it's a lot closer to me, and I won't be upset either way of which player wins. But I still got Travis Hunter here being a top 5 player at both sides, and not just looking at snap count, but looking at what he's doing while he's out there with those snaps.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation around that to be had. We'll say
give me the real raw Hunter take here. Give me the real raw Hunter.
I like Ashton Jeanty taking it. I mean, I think it's something that if you put Ashton Jeanty, if you switch the players, he's been such a dominant force. It's tough to say because of what the Mountain West looks like, what would happen. I think the only real test you have to show for Ashton Jeanty is that Oregon game where he performed really well. Mm-hmm. It's apples to oranges to compare the two guys. I think Ashton Jeanty takes it just because of being dominant at the one position. I think Travis Hunter is top 5 in each individual position. It says a lot. It says his value to the team. I don't think he's the best offensive player on that team, even, So the level that Ashton Jeanty elevates Boise State, I think, is more than what Travis Hunter elevates Colorado as. And that's where I think that he gets the edge for me.
And that's a understandable edge here. And, my final point when it comes to Travis is I think about that Baylor game for him where he's able to make plays, forcing a fumble in a game where they most likely should have lost. Sure. Obviously, LaJohntay Webster for Colorado is a great receiver. FAU transfer made a huge impact. But it seems like to have someone like Travis who can make the play you need, whether it's a big play on the offense or a touchdown on the offense, a key turnover, a key deflection to lock down half the field. It's a lot of impactful parts of the game defensively and offensively. But of course, we talked about for Ashton Jeanty having to scheme and shape shift the box in terms of the players you keep in it and really being, having someone like him who can just pound the Rock to take control of the game is tough to stop. Statistically, we've seen other running backs have seasons like him. I've been seeing more graphics of players like Kevin Smith from UCF in similar competition, playing in the group of 5 back in the day for UCF, and other guys from Wisconsin in the past who have had similar rushing seasons. We have not seen a player play 2 positions and be top 5, and so it's tough. I don't think you can go wrong either way. I'm just Team Travis on this one. And so that was the one conference championship game that did feature a Heisman candidate. And another one that did, I think that would be the Oregon Penn State game, the Big Ten championship. Oregon was victorious. Such an impressive campaign from Dylan Gabriel. I feel like we're not giving it as much respect, at least around the college football landscape, because he's been consistent at UCF. He was consistent at Oklahoma, and it's not as sexy of a story given Oklahoma seems to be this, plug and play program. What were your thoughts from that game and what Gabriel maybe did for his Heisman chances or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Dylan Gabriel, for Heisman chances, it's just a year where you got some dogs out there that he's not going to win it. Knowing the kind of character that he's shown for this team, if anyone watched Game Day, you got to see a little bit more about him. And it's always about winning the games. He's kind of probably by the end of this year be the all-time leader pass touchdowns in college football. I mean, it's the stats that he's brought to every team that he's played for has been tremendous. It was a good game. I mean, he propelled this team to victory, but Penn State put up a good fight too. I mean, both teams are going to be in the playoffs. Penn State still getting a home game. So it was one of those that was really just for the bye. Both teams are going to be in a great situation either way.
Yep, both teams are really going to be in a good situation. We'll definitely talk more about just kind of the playoff bracket here on this episode, but both teams got in. Penn State showed a lot with their offense. One of their most impressive offensive performances came short in that game. The other major championship from Saturday, and we're going to kind of dive more into it, is the ACC championship. A lot was on the line in terms of which teams got in, with Clemson and SMU. Bama finding themselves on the outside. But on the field, we saw Clemson got out to a really strong lead, similar to what we've seen them do in the ACC in years past, where they've played a Miami in the conference championship, and it feels like it's mismatched. But SMU showed a lot of fight coming back in the second half and getting it a lot closer. Major respects to the SMU program in that one, just to come up short after that long kick return at the end for them.
Yeah, it was tough for SMU. You put up such a good fight in the fourth quarter, 17 points unanswered in the fourth, and then you give up the field goal there at the end. It was a great comeback. I mean, both teams will be in the playoff, just similar to Oregon and Penn State. Both teams have the potential to do something in the playoff, and they showed it in this game that they are more evenly matched. Clemson coming out strong. Everyone was like, SMU's done. This is the SMU that had they played anybody, like this is what they would have looked like. They put up a good fight and they came back, and it's a big confidence booster for the team that even though you lost, you still didn't lose by that much.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, it's a huge confidence booster, and for Kate Klubnik, right? He's had a couple situations this season where he's had to come from behind. Obviously you want to find yourself not in that position, not come from behind, but having to continue to maintain the lead in this particular game, and he stepped up to the plate. We've seen it in the Pitt game, and so I think they've already given away some of the awards in the conference when it comes to top players, and statistically it's tough to compete with Cam Ward, but Kate Klubnik definitely deserves to be a part of that discussion for any other awards they have not given out yet in that conference. And lastly, from the G5, we saw Army took care of business against Tulane. I'd be lying to you if I told you I watched the Jacksonville State game, but props to them. Ohio took the MAC over Miami. Timothy Chalamet knew a lot more than most people thought when it came to Parker Navarro in that game, and found a way to talk about what he knows. And then from the Sun Belt Conference, Marshall beat Louisiana. Bowl game wise, I think Marshall's actually slated to play Army in the Independence Bowl, so that's a good bowl matchup of two conference champions from the G5, and that kind of rounds out our conference champions outside of the SEC championship that took place here in Atlanta. And so that game delivered so much great defense, some stumbling on offense. The main story for Texas was the turnovers for Quinn once again, and locking up Contravian Wisner to one of his season lows with 51 yards. When you think about the SEC championship and what Georgia was able to do, what are some things that really stood out to you?
Yeah, coming into the game, I think my biggest call was that there's no way that Georgia defense can do exactly what they did in the first game against Texas. This Texas offense has changed a little bit. They've established a new identity. Running the ball, Contravion Wisner has been crushing it the past few games. Georgia's defense, we've seen them fall back a little bit, give up a lot of points. I think this is one where Texas could do it. It didn't happen that way at all. It almost felt exactly the same as the first game. Quinn Ewers getting sacked 6 times. He didn't do well under pressure. Both picks came under pressure. Contravion Wisner couldn't necessarily do anything either. 2.7 yards per carry. They shut Texas down, essentially.
Yep. They shut Texas down, right? Total, they had 31 rushing yards in the day. And you saw it in the first half. It just felt like Texas had the lead, but every opportunity where they settled for a field goal versus a touchdown, you just felt like Georgia was still in it. And that feeling exists because you've seen what they've been able to do against Alabama, what they're able to do against Georgia Tech. This is a very tough team to take out. And last episode, I talked about them being resilient. Their backup quarterback comes in, once Carson Beck has an elbow injury at the end of the first half, and they don't truly miss a beat.
No, they don't. And when you're a Texas team and you're playing in Georgia's second home, you can't have opportunities that you squander, whether that's taking a field goal, but they miss multiple field goals. So you can't give Georgia an opportunity to be playing an easier ball game because you're not performing offensively. But then on the other hand, like you're saying, Carson Beck comes out of the game, Stockton comes in, and because Texas didn't take advantage of the opportunities that they had early on, it made a perfect path for Georgia. Behind Stockton, they weren't unstoppable. They weren't, an immaculate team, but he did just enough to be better than Carson Beck in the first half. But that's probably because of a different look. He did a lot with his legs, showed a different look in that game. But because of what Texas was doing offensively, they gave Georgia an opportunity to do what they did with less.
Yeah, and I think we have a graphic here, the tale of two halves, and you talked about it with what Stockton was able to do from a second half perspective. 71 passing yards, played a role in the 13 points for the team. A lot of that comes from Trevor Etienne. I mean, he ultimately had about 90 yards. I feel like the formula for him is just get the ball in his hands. Like it's not anything profound, but he's a warm up, get warm guy. Nate Frazier is the power guy. So if you're a Georgia fan, I'm sure you love what Nate brings to the table. He's a true freshman, so pony up whatever dollars you got to do to keep him. He is really solid. But the total offense with Stockton out there, he just looks like a football guy. Like I can't really explain it more than that. But the number 14, he looks like someone who's just gonna run the rock and just do what he has to do. His arm was okay, and it got the job done. For Texas, does this raise any questions or concerns going into the game with Clemson and what you maybe do at certain positions?
Offensively, yeah, I think it does. Defensively, no. I mean, defensively, I think Texas played great. You gave up the points there at the end. You gave up the rush at the end of overtime to Gunnar Stockton. I don't think defensively there's any problems. Offensively, you do have to start thinking about it. I thought Arch Manning was going to play multiple times in this game. Not because Quinn Ewers was struggling, but I thought he was going to be built in as a part of the game plan. Then you see him take one snap there in overtime to start out the overtime period. Going forward, there may be an opportunity for him to get back on the field. I don't think that a lot of things were Quinn Ewers' fault. When you don't have a rushing game that's going well, it's tough to ask the quarterback to sit back there in a pocket that's collapsing quickly. So, yeah, I'm always going to think that we're going to see Arch Manning, whether they actually do it. And I think it's going to be a 2-quarterback thing. I don't think that they're going to take Quinn Ewers out. He's got him to this point in the season.
Right.
But yeah, what do you think?
I agree with you. I don't think it's a full benching situation. It's, to me, it feels like if you believe that this is going to help reignite the offense or offer a different type of spark, put in Arch. It seems that Sark really, from his coaching decisions and what I see, he doesn't want to, diminish the confidence of someone like Quinn Ewers. And I think that's why he sticks with him long-term in some of these games. I think if he was to have put him in more for the second time in this Georgia series, the toughest matchup that Texas has had, that might hurt his confidence. I don't believe that he will have as much of a concern putting in someone like Arch in the playoffs because it's do or die. So if you feel like you need to do something different to get a spark there, I could see him doing it.
Yeah. And me personally, going forward in the season, I think it could look similar to this game for Texas because of how good their defense is, that they won't need to score that much. You don't need him to do a lot. He has great receivers there at Texas that have made great plays. I mean, I think there was plenty of times where the ball was maybe a lower percentage catch that they made. So, going into these games against Clemson, should they win that game, play in Arizona State, I think that Texas's defense could hold those teams to low points, but you can't be leaving points on the table. You have to be scoring. Whichever quarterback gives them the best chance. I know Sark will play the right guy. On the flip side, Carson Beck getting injured in that game, likely right now, reports likely going to be out for the Sugar Bowl. They have a long time till then, which if you're already ruling him out now or starting to have that conversation, I'm not sure that that's a good sign for the future. Does Gunnar Stockton give them a good chance to still win the college football playoff?
I mean, I can only go off of what we've seen thus far and what we believe the path looks like. And, if you're going to play someone like Indiana and you anticipate a matchup where you're able to lock down that offense, like Ohio State was able to do, I think Georgia's fine if you keep it to needing 21 to 28 points. If it needs to be a high scoring game, I don't know if we have enough of a sample size to see what Stockton can do. He made one mistake turning the ball over to a really good DB. We talk about him all the time here with Jahdae Barron. But I don't know if he's going to give you that massive offensive explosion. But I saw pretty risk averse football and I saw tough nose football, and I think he can get you to a spot where if you match up with SMU, Penn State, or Boise State, and you somehow can get past that second round, I think you have enough getting into the semifinals.
Yeah, I mean, you got a lot of time. You got a lot of time to warm up, and I mean, there's so much time. You never know. Beck could come back. It's not confirmed that he's going to be out. There's already just reports that it's potential. You got some time. Maybe work out something that feeds his legs a little bit more. It was a big play there in overtime to put them in the position to win the game. Maybe you can work something out. What Haynes King did against Georgia, the week before. Maybe you can work out something like that. You saw how effective that is from a quarterback. So, I mean, both teams put on a good show defensively. Offensively, I'd say neither team necessarily impressed.
We saw the six field goal attempts for Texas. Like I said, offensively, it wasn't that impressive. Those couple of, like, I wouldn't call them fade routes, but just kind of like, high throws that Quinn had at the end to try to get a score. It just weren't hitting the dot there. Definitely areas of opportunity for improvement offensively. If Texas is able to do what Georgia was able to do to Clemson in their first round game defensively, like you mentioned, Texas shouldn't need as much points to win their game. Like, in transitive property would say, well, Texas has lost a little bit better to Georgia than Clemson did week one. So that should favor Texas, but that's why you play the games. Like, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
That's not how it works fully, but we'll see what happens when they do play. Any final thoughts from the conference championship when it comes to Georgia taking it and, what that means for them going forward?
No, I mean, I think it's a good spot for Georgia now getting on by. Texas, your first year in the SEC, you made it to the game. You didn't win, but it's still, Texas is one of these teams that can play with anybody. They're going to get a great opening matchup, and then, you hope to keep on trucking. So,
controversial question. Do you feel like Texas lost this game or Georgia won this game?
Ooh, I feel like Texas lost this game, and for a couple reasons. The missed field goals was one piece. The missed block on the pick, that is the one that I think lost in the game. It's a TNT, takes no talent play. It's just doing the right things. You make the block there. You take it to the house. I'm not saying it wins them the game, but it puts them in a much better position. It feels like there were things that Texas couldn't do effectively. Georgia did everything they could to win this game. But if you're Texas and you let a backup quarterback come in, you still can't do things. I do feel like it was more of Texas at fault than Georgia on top.
I'm right there with you, right? I was watching the game with some, and whatnot, and I was kind of like, it feels like Georgia let Texas continue to have chances to win this game. And with that interception, right, if you make that block, you're probably in a spot to score. You're in a spot where you have the lead and you have to stop this offense. You're putting the pressure back on Georgia. And for Georgia, it felt like, to me, there's no pressure if you lose the conference championship game with your backup quarterback. All the pressure is on Texas. And in that moment, it felt like Texas didn't really step up to handle that pressure personally. Yeah, so I think Texas lost this game.
It only matters if you're in your conference championship game with your backup quarterback if you're Florida State. That's the only time it matters.
It's the only time it matters, right? All the Florida State fans had nothing else to tweet about these days and have reemerged back on the internet to talk about their backup quarterback challenges and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um,
They
but
forgot about they forgot about the auto bid system because the playoff hasn't been on their mind all year.
hasn't been on their mind since maybe week 2. So
But
hey, that's our conference championship recap in a nutshell. A great conference championship week. And so, what does this now lead to? Our final 12 team playoff, our first ever 12 team playoff. The committee announced it on Sunday around noon. We saw it on ESPN, and now we have our first round matchups. The 4 byes are going to be held by Arizona State, Georgia, Oregon, and Boise State. And that leads to Clemson playing in the first round. We're going to have Texas taking on Clemson. That's the first SEC involved matchup. Then we're going to have Ohio State taking on Tennessee. Tennessee traveling to Columbus. As of right now, the line opens up with Ohio State favored by 7 and Texas favored by 11. What are our thoughts here on the new SEC podcast when it comes to these first round matchups initially for the SEC teams?
yeah, the SEC teams matchups, one looks more favorable than the other. I think we talked about at the beginning of the episode, the biggest thing happening this year is the home games that are going to be a part of this playoff. Usually it's all at a neutral site. It's always domed in. There's no weather problems. Now you got, Tennessee having to play in Columbus in December. That's a tough thing to do. Clemson traveling to Austin. That's going to be a tough thing to do. So initially, I do like both home teams in this game. Something about being a home team just adds to, the fan base, adds to the effect of the game and getting in there. Both, Ohio State playing at night against Tennessee. So yeah, I think they're going to be both good games, but I do like both home teams just as an early take.
Yeah, I think they're both will be really good games. I think Clemson and Texas will be pretty close early on. And at least my early prediction there, I think these teams are relatively even in some ways. Obviously, I believe Texas is better, but both teams have not been as tested as much as we think they should be or could be with the schedules they have. Some more than others in different conferences, but for the Ohio State Tennessee matchup, what excites me is the rushing attack of Dylan Sampson going against this defense of Ohio State. Like, what are they going to do to have to bottle up that offense? And what can Nico do in this cold weather? Like you mentioned, right? The coldest game he's probably playing is, playing Arkansas on the road here, which I think was in October. But there's not many games you're playing that are that cold in Tennessee.
No, it's not. And it's been a point that's been really, really harped on. And for the other 2 games as well, it's the cold weather is going to make an impact. I do think with a Tennessee team who does pound the rock as kind of their primary method of moving the ball, cold weather isn't as much of an impact because you do have, that bruising back, and it's tougher to tackle in the cold too. It will impact Ohio State. They're all people. They're all going to get cold.
Yep.
So, I think it's going to be a good matchup. It's not a favorable pod of the bracket when you're looking at Tennessee and Ohio State because you do have to play Oregon. Clemson and Texas, on the other hand, the winner of that one plays Arizona State. No shade to Arizona State, but I think between those 2 teams, if you would rather play Arizona State or Oregon, give me Arizona State any day.
Right. And that's what the committee thinks, right? They're both conference champs. Obviously, Oregon's the number 1 conference champ. According to the committee, Arizona State's the 4th conference champ and the number 12 overall in the final CFP rankings. Yes, you'd rather play Arizona State. And so it's not as favorable of a draw for Tennessee compared to Texas, but that makes sense. Texas was 3 overall, 5 from a seeding perspective, and Tennessee was 7 overall, 9 from a seeding perspective. The other major game to look at from that weekend, it's going to be taking place at 8 p.m. Eastern in Notre Dame, Indiana. Notre Dame versus Indiana, 7 versus 10 seeds wise, 5 versus 8, 5 versus 8 rankings wise. The winner of that game is going to take on Georgia. There was something that was asked to Dan Lanning on the CFP ranking show that I liked from Nick Saban, and it was, how do you plan on preparing for 2 different opponents, and not how are you going to practice knowing you're playing 2 different opponents? And that's kind of the spot that Georgia's in right now, having to prepare for Notre Dame or Indiana.
Yeah, it's two completely different games that you're playing, whichever one you're going to get. And I don't think that either team here, Georgia, should be looking forward to. I think that they're both teams that can put up a good game. Indiana's been clowned on a lot this year, but when you get in a situation for a playoff shot, anybody can show up to those games. So yeah, I don't know how Georgia's going to be preparing for something like this. You're going to get a week, you're going to get some time. It's kind of similar to what we have, even a little bit over a week. You're going to have some time to prepare, just kind of like how they do for the SEC championship. Georgia came out with a pretty good game plan against Texas, who they'd already played before, but adjustments in mind. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, in this one, I do like Notre Dame. I think these it'll be another cold game, but it's nothing new for the Indiana team. I just like the style of Notre Dame football that they're playing. They've been a good team other than the NIU loss. Other than that, they've been pretty dominant.
Yeah, they've been really dominant, and statistics would point to Rourke, the Indiana quarterback, being the better quarterback here. 27 touchdowns in a year, 4 picks compared to Riley Leonard. But Riley Leonard has proven to have some SEC success, taking down A&M in Week 1. Not as much success when it comes to MAC teams, but more success in the SEC, of course. Vegas right now has this game as 50.5 from the over-under perspective. So they're expecting a pretty high-scoring game in the cold. So if they think these two, independent and Big Ten teams can put up some high-scoring points, I'm sure these other SEC teams can score as well. Bringing it back to this game, I think that I like Notre Dame personally as an early look. We'll do, I'm sure, a more in-depth breakdown as we get closer to the game. But I like Notre Dame in this one just from a physicality standpoint, an experience standpoint, and what Freeman's been able to do here for this program thus far.
Yeah. And after conference championship week, 3 of these games were pretty much set before what the committee decided to do. Barring a couple matchup, rankings changes, we kind of knew that these 6 teams would be in. The biggest question mark was who was going to be playing this game against Penn State, the final game of the weekend. Would it be Alabama? Would it be SMU? Ultimately, SMU getting the nod based on being inside their conference championship game while Alabama sat at home. Now they travel to Penn State, which could be arguably one of the colder places to play. It's going to be at noon, so they get the benefit there. Penn State 7.5 favorites. Who do you like in this game as kind of an early take?
Yeah, as an early look, I really like SMU in this game. I think that they're going to hear all the critique, all the criticism. This will be their 3rd test. They can't go 0 for 3. I think that, they will match up well offensively to this defense. They've played a pretty tough defense in Clemson, from their last game. There's not as much of a litmus test in terms of tough defenses on their schedule, like just from who I've seen them playing with Nevada and TCU and some of the likes in the conference. But this offense has been able to light it up typically. We saw it against Louisville. We saw it against other teams for people that watch ACC football. On the other side for Penn State, are they prepared to play in a shootout? We saw that against Oregon. I think it could be a pretty high scoring matchup. If Penn State jumps to a pretty high lead, I don't know if on the road, not in a neutral site like the ACC championship game, if SMU is able to handle that type of environment. We talk a lot about big time football, and it's usually kind of been about the SEC and these big venues holding 70, 80,000. There's not that many big venues in the ACC that have these type of fans and these fan bases, and that's going to play a huge factor, especially when you're going to play in somewhere like Beaver Stadium. So
I love that. I mean, it's a great point. It's a huge point. It's the lights are going to be bright. SMU coming out in that ACC championship, I was worried about what SMU would look like in big games. The second half proved us that maybe this isn't. They're not going to be a rollover team. I think this will be a great game. I think all of these games could have the potential to be great games. Still an early look. We're going to down the road be previewing these more in depth as players are announced and make sure that everybody's going to be playing. And as the lines shift, over the next 11, 12 days. But I question with these games, what team winning makes the best quarterfinal matchup? For me, I think it's Ohio State playing Oregon in the Rose Bowl as the sun goes down. I think that would make the most fun quarterfinal matchup for me. Is there one for you that would make the best quarterfinal matchup?
Yeah, I think Ohio State, Oregon, or Tennessee, Oregon's going to create the best matchup. You get to face the number 1 team in the country. I don't think it's fair the way the bracket is made, where they have to have this type of matchup. And, we have a whole segment about what we think about the playoff format. So go check it out if you're watching this particular breakdown. But I think that produces the best matchup. The second most, we'll say, sexiest matchup would be Notre Dame, Georgia. Yeah, I'm going big brands. Yep, this is a new SC podcast. But I think it'll be a big brand, good game. I don't know how entertaining it will be compared to watching Ohio State play Oregon or Tennessee play Oregon. Once again, I would love to see what Tennessee can do against the number one team in the country, because the SEC wins, bragging rights are going to be all over the place. You let the third best team in the SEC beat your number one team in the Big Ten. That's going to be a lot on the line there for Tennessee if it plays out that way. So those would be the 2 or 3 matchups that excite me the most.
Yeah, this is a big year for conference pride because of the way the amount of debate that's been around strength of schedule. It's a big year for conference pride. So even if you're a fan of a conference team that's not in this, you're almost like you want your conference to do well because it means something for the players that are going to be coming in for recruiting. So just the overall vibe of what your conference means. So it's one for sure
Absolutely.
that has some bragging rights tied.
There's a lot of bragging rights tied. And I think, from an SEC lens, having the SEC have a representative in Georgia being able to take on Notre Dame, the independent team, to kind of give you an idea of where they should be ranked or how good or not good they are, or being able to play Indiana, the third or fourth best team in the Big Ten, and what Georgia can do against them is a good litmus test, right? Like, does Indiana play them close if they beat Notre Dame? Do they get destroyed, right? Those are talking points that we hear for years. We've been talking about Georgia TCU now since it happened. On the flip side, again, Tennessee, what can they do against Ohio State? Ohio State's supposed to be the second or third best team in the Big Ten. What can they do? So you're absolutely right on what it means from a conference pride perspective. And we have more of a litmus test than just these New Year's Six games or these bowl games where we've seen the last couple of years players have been opting out, and even more so this year with the portal and just with the lack of New Year's Six games that are, not playoff related.
Yeah, and it could change the ideas around cross-conference games and which conferences are better. And, just looking initially at the odds to win the national championship right now, the highest 6 odds are SEC, Big Ten, and Notre Dame in there as well. The ACC's contenders, the Big 12's contenders, plus Indiana are at the back of this pool here. So this is an opportunity. Should SMU make a run, Clemson make a run, Arizona State be able to win once they get past their bye week, prove some Vegas bettors wrong, maybe make a couple people some money out there in Arizona. But it is a league that's favored by a couple of conferences. So this is an opportunity to change the narrative.
It's absolutely an opportunity to change the narrative. And I think, we always look at the stats in terms of how many games in the playoffs the SEC's won, right? I think you sent me the graphic of how many the SEC won, how many the ACC's won. And, most years it's 1-1-1-1. And when it comes to the amount of teams the conferences get in, so that's the amount of at-bats you get or attempts. Now we're seeing it for Big Ten teams, 3 SEC teams. There's more at-bats per team to prove what they can do. And, the SEC got some tough matchups. Clemson, from what the committee thinks is a tough matchup, they gave that to Texas. Ohio State's a tough matchup, so it's not like they're playing, some of the teams that we thought were fringe in the Indianas, the Penn States, the Boise States, the Arizona States to start off when it comes to this. And the odds to win CFP, information is interesting to me because it's partially about how good they think these teams are and partially about how easy they think that path is for them to get to the championship. And so when I look at someone like Penn State having the 5th best odds, I think it's because Penn State has to go play, but a Boise State if they get past SMU, compared to Notre Dame has to get past Georgia and get past Indiana. I think their path is a little bit tougher. I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that Penn State's better than Notre Dame. I think it's more of their path.
Yeah, it's absolutely path inclusive. I mean, Ohio State, though, sitting at plus 450, they do have to go through Tennessee and Oregon to get there. So it's path inclusive, but still, taking into account the strength of the team in the eyes of the people who put the money down. So it's very interesting to look at with the odds in mind, maybe without the odds in mind. Too early call. What you got? Who's winning it all? Too early. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna give a pretty boring answer here. I think that Georgia and Oregon do match up in the national championship. This Oregon team looks like they're on a path. They're destined to get to the championship. I like Oregon in the national championship, but I think Georgia finds a way to get to the national championship.
All right, give me Texas, Georgia playing again. Give me Texas, Georgia playing again in the game. I can see Georgia not making it. I think that Texas has a good shot. I don't think, again, both games that Texas played against Georgia, I don't think are the right Texas team. I think it was an outlying performance from Texas. I think that Texas could win the whole thing, but I think any team on here could do it. I like Texas's route.
I like Texas has a great route, right? I think, for playing at Arizona State in the second round, it's a very competitive team. I think they match up pretty well. You get past Arizona State, you're either going to play Oregon, Tennessee, or Ohio State.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
That's a tough one, right? If it's Tennessee, it's an SEC rematch or an SEC matchup. They didn't play this season. If it's Ohio State, I mean that's a really tough matchup. And if it's Oregon, it's also hard as well. I like Georgia's path a little bit more with the SMU, Penn State, Boise State quadrant kind of being above them. If we're looking at the bracket and you're watching our show versus listening to it, I like what they have to do to get out of that quad of Indiana, Notre Dame. And I like what they have to do between Penn State, SMU, and Boise State. Now, if Boise State can beat Georgia and they can beat an SMU or Penn State, things get interesting. I think it could be anybody's championship in that regard.
Yeah, for sure.
Which team do you think has the least likelihood to win a playoff game?
Clemson.
Okay.
I think that they're the biggest underdogs in week 1. I think that they have the hardest one. They were the only team outside the top 12 to make the playoff. I think that says something about the strength of the team. We've seen them already play 2 SEC matchup games, and we saw how those both went. I think that Clemson is the least likely to win a game for sure. Now, there's teams on bye that I think could absolutely lose their first game too, Arizona State being one. But yeah.
Yeah. I like
State too.
Boise State's another one. I think the fact that Boise – like if Boise was in a spot where I believe they deserve the 4 seed personally, just given the strength of schedule compared to Arizona State, if they had to play Texas, I don't think Boise would get a win in this playoff. To me, having SMU and Penn State is a much more favorable matchup for them. So I would say I don't think Indiana is able to get a win in this playoff.
Okay.
Most likely.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. Things are going to change. We're going to be previewing games. The odds are going to change. We'll keep you updated on those as well as you look to maybe get a future in or something. But that kind of wraps just the first look here.
That kind of wraps the first look, right? And the committee did release their final college football playoff rankings, the full top 25. And so, in addition to us, covering some of these playoff games, we'll talk about some of the bowl games. And so if you look at the college football playoff top 25, we're going to see Missouri playing in a bowl game. We're going to see South Carolina taking on Illinois. I think they were invited to the Citrus Bowl, so that's really big for them. Both teams 9-3. Great opportunity to show what the conference is about with the players that still are on the roster and not going to the portal. We're going to be able to see BYU take on Colorado from an out of conference perspective. And of course, I talked about it earlier. Army's going to play Marshall. So, and then Miami's playing Iowa State. So not a ton of matchups that are, SEC to really strong teams outside of that South Carolina, Illinois when it comes to top 25. Ole Miss is playing Duke. Some people think Duke should be a top 25 team. And Lane Kiffin's had a really strong bone to pick with the ACC over the past couple weeks. And so that game could be very indicative of how he feels about that conference. Maybe he runs it up on them. We'll see. But that pretty much rounds out the committee's final top 25 rankings heading into next week.
Yeah, it is what it is. I think there's a couple teams, like you mentioned, that could still absolutely be ranked. But we're going to see bowl season. Hopefully a lot more people play. We've already seen the transfer portal open up and it get kind of wild. So we'll get a little bit closer to the games before we do some previews. So that way we can see, who will actually be playing in this new era of college football. But yeah, a lot to look forward to.
A lot to look forward to. And so if you like content like this, please like, follow, subscribe. This is a new SC podcast. We love talking to y'all and hearing your thoughts in the comments. College football playoffs coming up. Transfer portal's heating up. Recruits are being signed. Bowl games are happening. The coaching carousel is going to get warmed up here too as well in this offseason. So stay tuned here on the new SC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. Got Hunter Zeisman. Until next time.